She wasn't a commander. Not anymore. Not here. She was just another clipboard in khaki, another set of boots moving unnoticed down fluorescent hallways. At least that's what they thought when they laughed at Serena Hale. Late 20s, short hair pulled back tight, sleeves rolled neatly, but always buttoned to the collar. Like she had something to hide. Like she was afraid to breathe wrong in the presence of louder voices. But what no one in that sprawling military hospital realized, what no one cared to notice, was that the collar didn't hide weakness. It hid history, the kind that would silence every smirk in the room if it ever slipped. Before I take you deeper, let me say this. If you agree that respect isn't about titles, but about what's carried quietly in the shadows, like and subscribe, because this is one of those stories that shows why we can't forget. The day it began was ordinary in every visible way. Clipboards stacked, supply counts running late, lieutenants shouting about misplaced syringes and broken scanners. But beneath the hum of logistics and the stale scent of disinfectant, a sharper current moved, one made of glances, muttered jokes, and the kind of mockery that always finds its way to the quiet one. Serena had been stationed at the hospital for 8 months now, her official title bland enough to be overlooked. Logistics aide, support staff, backroom filler. But her movements betrayed none of the clumsiness they expected, every stride precise, every box lifted with controlled economy, every notation written in crisp block letters as if drilled into her bones long ago. And yet no matter how straight her posture, the laughter found her. Clipboard girl, they called her. File courier, secretary in boots. As though she hadn't worn a different uniform 5 years earlier. As though the silence in her eyes didn't come from nights spent under black skies listening for sounds no civilian would ever hear. Lieutenant Kessler was the loudest, the kind of young officer who loved the echo of his own authority, who strutted through the supply wing barking corrections like each syllable proved his worth. And he made a sport of mocking Serena. Hey, clipboard girl, you even know the difference between a platoon and a battalion? His voice bouncing off the walls as cadets chuckled, pretending not to fear his temper. She didn't answer. She never did. Just adjusted the box in her arms and kept walking, her jaw tightening for only a moment before smoothing back in a stillness. And to them that stillness meant nothing, just more proof she was harmless. But what none of them noticed was how she checked doors twice before leaving them, how her eyes swept corners instinctively when she entered a room, how she memorized routines without ever being asked. To them she was late 20s and underqualified, too young to be seasoned, too old to be green, stuck in the limbo of ordinary support staff. But the truth was she carried the weight of missions never acknowledged, briefings never written, scars never confessed. Still, the days blurred together until that one afternoon when the teasing pushed further than usual. Kessler leaning against the supply rack, smirking as she passed. But she couldn't even clear a room without a vacuum cleaner. Laughter spilling from the young recruits at his side. And Serena kept walking, her collar tight against her throat, her silence heavier than any retort. But one private, barely 19, frowned at the cruelty, sensing in her eyes something the others missed, something that looked less like ignorance and more like knowledge too sharp to waste on children. Serena didn't break stride, didn't correct them, because she didn't need to. Her history wasn't a tale sheet, ever offered voluntarily. It was sewn into her collar, into a patch no one had seen, into a symbol whispered about in barracks and war rooms, but never confirmed. The Night Fox Division. Most soldiers thought it was myth, a story to keep recruits humble. A covert detachment so precise they could infiltrate war zones invisible, exfiltrate with intelligence no satellite could capture, and erase entire threats without leaving a trace. Serena had walked among them, learned their doctrine, lived their silence, all before her 25th birthday. But none of that showed now as she stacked boxes of gauze and signed off shipment forms, her collar concealing the emblem that would have ended every joke in an instant. Instead, she bore the laughter, day after day, because she understood something they didn't, that respect taken too soon collapses into resentment. But respect revealed in the right moment rewrites everything. And so she waited, patient, steady, measured, until the day her collar slipped. And when it did, the hospital's fluorescent lights would never feel the same again. It happened so quickly most people missed it. The kind of slip that lasts no more than a heartbeat. But once seen, cannot be unseen. Serena was bending low to shift a crate of saline packs from the dock, the late afternoon sun slanting through the glass panes above and cutting a white line across her shoulder. And in that moment the top button of her collar loosened, the fabric tugging against the weight of her movement, revealing for a flicker of time a patch not sewn by regulation, but by memory, a small faded insignia pressed into the corner of her undershirt, the outline of a fox's head in midnight black, stitched with threads dulled by dust and sweat, but unmistakable to anyone who had ever whispered about the unit that wasn't supposed to exist. Private Donovan, the youngest of the group, froze where he stood, the laughter dying on his lips, his eyes widening in disbelief. He had seen that emblem once before, in a classified manual during advanced infantry training, a page marked for command staff only. Yet here it was, breathing, real, tucked under the collar of a woman everyone had laughed off as a glorified clerk. He didn't speak at first, too stunned, but Lieutenant Kessler noticed his stare and snapped, "What are you gaping at, Private?" before following his line of sight, catching just a shadow of the emblem before Serena straightened again, tugging her collar back with one hand in a gesture so subtle it might have been dismissed as habit, but it wasn't. Dismissed. Donovan's face betrayed too much, and in an instant the room's energy shifted from laughter to uneasy silence, the kind that tastes like metal in the air. What the hell was that? One of the recruits whispered, but Kessler scoffed, shaking his head. "Don't tell me you're falling for that garbage. Probably some surplus patch she found online. These wannabes love to play dress-up," he said loud enough for Serena to hear, his voice dripping with ridicule. But his smirk was thinner now, less certain, as if he too recognized the fox but refused to believe it. Serena kept moving boxes, calm as ever, neither confirming nor denying, and that silence unsettled them more than denial ever could. By the end of the shift, whispers had begun spreading down the corridors. Half rumors, half guesses. "Did you see her collar? That wasn't regulation. Looked like a fox, like the Fox Division." "No, that's just a myth, isn't it?" Yet no matter how the rumors twisted, the image remained burned into Donovan's mind, the emblem glinting in the strip of light, like something sacred, dangerous, untouchable. That night he searched every archive he could access, his screen glowing in the barracks as he typed "Night Fox Emblem" into secure channels, finding only redacted reports, pages blacked out line after line, operations unnamed, locations sealed. But each reference, though brief, carried the same tone: lethal efficiency, untraceable actions, missions acknowledged only in shadows. By morning, Donovan wasn't the only one digging. Sergeant Avery, a decade older and seasoned enough to know better than to chase ghost stories, had overheard and quietly confirmed what Donovan feared. He had once seen that emblem carved into a plaque in the Special Operations Legacy Office, tucked away in a wing only senior officers entered. And so, when Serena walked back into the supply wing the next day, every eye followed her with a new tension. Not quite respect, not yet, but not mockery either. Something in between, the unease of realizing the person you dismissed might be carrying a history deeper than you could measure. Kessler still tried to hold the room, cracking another joke. "Careful, clipboard girl's got a fashion patch now." But his laugh was brittle, hollow, and no one joined him this time. Not even the recruits desperate for approval. Serena noticed, of course, but she said nothing, just checked her clipboard, and moved on, her collar once again fastened tight, the fox hidden from view. Yet the damage was done, the silence louder than any retort, and by noon the whispers had reached command. At 1,300 hours sharp, a black SUV with tinted windows rolled up to the hospital's front lot, its engine purring low, its presence heavy. The driver stepped out first, crisp in dress uniform, opening the door for a tall, broad-shouldered colonel whose chest bore ribbons that told their own story, without hesitation. The colonel walked past the guards, straight down the hall, and into the logistics wing, his boots striking the linoleum with a cadence that hushed the entire room. Recruits stiffened instinctively, officers adjusted their posture, and Lieutenant Kessler nearly dropped his pen when the colonel's gaze swept the room and landed squarely on Serena Hale. For the first time since she'd arrived on base, every laugh, every sneer, Every dismissive glance dissolved into silence, so thick you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The colonel stopped 3 feet from her, eyes steady, jaw set, and without waiting, without explanation, he raised his hand in a precise salute. Not casual, not obligatory, but sharp, deliberate, and unmistakably respectful. A salute that came from recognition, not rank. The room froze, disbelief carved into every face. And in that pause the truth hung heavy in the air. Serena Hale was not who they thought she was, and the fox on her collar was not a myth. The silence after that salute was the kind that bends the air, the kind that makes every throat tighten and every glance dart nervously to the person no one dared mock anymore. And as the colonel's hand lowered, Serena Hale did not move, did not smile, did not even blink. She simply returned the salute with calm precision, her eyes steady, her posture unshaken. And in that single exchange the hierarchy of the entire logistics wing had shifted. The colonel's voice cut through the thick quiet. Low and deliberate. "Sergeant Hale, it's been a long time." And the use of her rank, a rank no one in the room knew she carried, fell like a hammer against the brittle pride of every officer who had ever called her clipboard girl. Kessler stammered. "Sergeant? She's support staff, sir. There must be." But the colonel turned his head slowly, his gaze locking on Kessler with the weight of command honed in combat, and the young lieutenant's voice withered mid-sentence. "Lieutenant," the colonel said coldly, "you do well to remember the names of those who wrote the very manuals you pretend to quote." And then he shifted his eyes back to Serena, softer now, almost reverent. "The Night Fox Division still remembers you." And in that moment, the whispers became certainty. The emblem was no longer rumor but fact, a revelation that cracked the arrogance of the room wide open. Serena inclined her head once, a gesture neither proud nor ashamed, just steady, as though she had carried this weight long enough to know it needed no embellishment. And then, without another word, she stepped back, allowing the colonel to face the others. He spoke with clipped authority, recounting enough to sear the truth into every watching mind. How Serena Hale, before she was 25, had served as tactical intelligence officer for Night Fox, a division that never sought headlines because their missions were never supposed to exist, missions in the dead of night, under skies that swallowed sound, across borders not drawn on maps, where entire platoons walked out alive because one young woman saw patterns no satellite could track, because she mapped shadows like others mapped roads. She saved more of your brothers and sisters in arms than you will ever count, the colonel said sharply, his gaze sweeping the recruits who now stood rigid. And you laughed at her because she carried a clipboard. Shame burned across the faces of those who had joined the mockery, Kessler paling visibly as though the ground itself might swallow him. But Serena remained still, her silence cutting sharper than any rebuke could, and after the colonel finished, she spoke at last, her voice level, unhurried, each word heavy with patience earned through years of restraint. "Respect isn't measured by volume, it's measured by vigilance. And some of you still haven't learned that," she said. And her words were not loud, but they carried to every corner of the room, hanging there with a finality no one dared challenge. The colonel nodded once, affirming her, then ordered, "Effective immediately. Sergeant Hale is reinstated with full honors into advisory capacity. She will oversee all security logistics training on this base." And the recruits snapped too. Attention, the officers stiffening not from pride but from the sting of humiliation, realizing they now answered to the very woman they had dismissed as invisible. Over the next weeks, the transformation was slow but undeniable. Cadets who had once smirked when she passed now saluted her first, their eyes dropping in quiet respect, and even the loudest voices in the officer corps tempered their tone, their swagger dimmed by the memory of a colonel saluting a woman they had laughed off. Serena did not gloat, did not change her posture. She still carried clipboards, still counted supplies, still buttoned her collar. But when she spoke during training sessions, the room fell silent, because every word carried the weight of someone who had lived doctrine, not memorized it. She taught them things not in manuals: how to read silence, how to listen to terrain, how to know when a shadow is wrong. And slowly, quietly, the recruits began to imitate her habits, double-checking locks, scanning corners, pausing before decisions, And though no plaque bore her name yet, her influence carved itself into their routines. But the reckoning came full circle one storm-thick night, when the hospital's perimeter alarms glitched during a blackout, a scenario eerily similar to one Serena had seen play out years earlier in forgotten valleys overseas. And while officers panicked, scrambling with flashlights and broken radios, Serena was already moving, her steps sure, her eyes calculating, her hand brushing instinctively at the collar that hid the fox. And when the power returned, two unauthorized figures were caught at the outer fence, stopped not by technology, not by blaring alarms, but by Serena Hale's vigilance alone, her calm voice directing the response before anyone else even realized a breach had occurred. In the aftermath, recruits whispered with awe, officers muttered with embarrassment, but command did something no one expected. They renamed the logistics wing Hale Hall, not because she asked for it, not because she needed it, but because the story had already spread beyond the base, becoming legend. And still, Serena said little, her only comment a faint nod as she returned to her work, because she understood something the rest were still learning, that legacies aren't built in the spotlight. They are built in silence, in patience, in carrying what others cannot see. Months later, when new recruits arrived for orientation, they were brought first not to parade grounds or lecture halls, but to Hale Hall, where instructors told the story of the woman once mocked as support staff, who had carried within her collar the emblem of the Night Fox Division, and who, without raising her voice, had taught them that vigilance is the highest form of respect. And long after Serena herself had rotated out, her notebook remained pinned in glass on the hall's wall, a single line written in her steady hand. Respect is vigilance, practiced daily, a sentence that cadets repeated like scripture. Lieutenant Kessler never recovered his swagger, though to his credit, he stood straighter when Serena passed, and one quiet evening he sought her out, fumbling for an apology. But she only looked at him, her eyes calm, her words sparing. "You don't owe me an apology, Lieutenant. You owe yourself discipline." And then she walked away, leaving him with silence heavier than forgiveness. The legend of Serena Hale grew, not through parades or headlines, but through whispers carried across bases, training schools, and briefing rooms. The story of the young woman in her late 20s who carried a clipboard, wore her collar tight, and once revealed a fox stitched in black thread that silenced an entire base. A story retold whenever recruits began to laugh too easily at the quiet one in their ranks. A warning wrapped in memory that not all emblems are worn on sleeves. Some are carried under collars, waiting for the moment the world finally sees.